There's a particular set of rules that you must remember if you are to camp alone. Now, the first rule of camping alone is never set up your tent at night because this is when you are the most vulnerable and you cannot keep focus on what's behind you, what's around you, because you're focused on putting up the tent. The second rule is always have a fire going. No matter what time of day it is, always keep that fire going and keep it nice and bright and tall. The third rule that you must remember if you're camping alone is when you go in your tent at night, make sure it is completely sealed up. No holes, make sure everything is zipped and closed because it's believed that stuff can even come in through the tiniest of cracks. Now, the fourth rule, when you are camping alone, you should never make noise at night. You should never whistle. You should never sing. You should try and keep it quiet as possible. Now, the fifth rule, which is the most important, is always have some sort of entertainment. Keep yourself occupied. Have some music. Have an audio book, but never let yourself start to wander and let your mind go because that's when you are the most vulnerable. Now, there was this man named Jonathan. Jonathan decided he was going to go camping alone up in the Rocky Mountains. So he heads up to the spot and he sets up his tent and gets his campsite ready. And he said he just remembered that, there were all these sounds of wildlife and the wind blowing, and it was just very peaceful and sort of like musical. And he said, he had his dog with him, and they sat around the fire for a bit, and it started to get late, so he decided to go into his tent. So as he goes in his tent, his dog lays over to the side of him, and soon he begins to doze off. Well, at some point in time in the night, he awakes to something shaking his tent. And he said he could hear this voice saying, "Please come out of the tent. Like, I need help. Help me, please. Get out of the tent. Help me." And so he's like, what's going on? Like, what's going on? So he goes to the zipper, he unzips the tent, and he goes outside. But when he gets out of the tent, there's nobody around. It's just completely quiet. And it was eerily quiet because he couldn't hear the wind anymore. He couldn't hear the wildlife. And he said that the other strange thing was when he went to bed, there was this bright full moon overhead. But as he looked up in the sky, the moon was gone. There wasn't any clouds. It was a completely clear night. But the moon somehow had disappeared. So this kind of freaked him out a little bit. He goes back inside his tent and he zips up the zipper. Well, he lays down and he said, his dog would come to the side of him or would lay by his feet. And that always made him feel a little better. So he said, he started to kind of doze off again. He said that's when he kept feeling like the dog, like rubbing his leg. And he's like, "What are you doing, boy? Like, I'm trying to sleep." And he said that's when he looks down at his feet and there's nothing there. And when he looks over, his dog is right over here towards his head. So he is like, what's going on? Like, was there an animal or something? He unzips the tent, he goes outside, said, there was nothing out there. As he got ready to go back in his tent, he said he started to see these shadows. He said he could see figures that looked like they were tall, skinny, kind of lanky. They almost looked like they were crawling around amongst the trees. They were all around him. So he hurried up, got back inside his tent, and he zips it up. And he just said, he's just sitting there with his dog. And the whole time he thought it was strange because the dog didn't alert to any of this. It didn't bark. It was just quiet. It was just laying there. And he said that's when all of a sudden he felt this tent start to move. Something grabbed the tent and was dragging him. And he was so afraid that he passes out. And when he awakes, he said the tent was completely still, felt like everything was normal again. He said he thought it must have been a dream until he unzips the tent and he realizes he is a good distance away from his campsite. So he grabs his dog and they run out of there back to his vehicle and they left that night. And they left the tent and everything behind. So it's important to remember when you camp alone, always know the rules. Now, the legend goes that if you were to turn off the lights and say her name 3 times into the mirror, then she might appear. Sometimes it was said that she would rip out your eyes. Sometimes it was said that she would pull you into the mirror. Now, who was Mary? Some people believe that she could be traced back to the 1800s to a woman named Mary Worth, who lived in a small town in New England. And the story goes that the townspeople thought she was a witch. And when children started to disappear, they suspected that it was Mary Worth. So when they go to her house, They were shocked to discover she was using the blood to bathe in because she thought it would make her younger. So it said that she was taken and burned at the stake, and her last words were, if you were to say her name in the mirror, then she would return. Some people also speculate that it might come from the 1800s belief that the widows would often call to their deceased husbands in the mirrors, thinking they would return, only to see something else. Now, there was a story from this girl named Ashley. She said when she was younger, she remembered being at school, and she went into the girls' bathroom one day. Well, she overheard some girls laughing and giggling, and she said they were doing the whole Mary thing. So she kind of stayed there and listened to them. She said they did it 3 times, and all of a sudden, the lights went out in the bathroom. She heard these girls start screaming, and finally the lights came back on, and she said the girls started to look at her and were like, did you see her? Did you see her? And she's like, who? Who? And they said, there was a girl right next to you when the lights went out. And she kind of looked around and was like, no, no, there wasn't. And she said these girls ran out of the bathroom screaming. She stayed behind. She went to go wash her hands. And she said as she looked up in the mirror, she sees this woman with black hair covering her face, wearing this white dress, just standing there behind her in the mirror. She took off running out of the bathroom screaming, and she said she told her teacher. Teacher went in the bathroom, they couldn't find anyone. There was another story from a girl named Caitlin. Caitlin said that her and her brother used to joke around and they would do the whole Mary thing. Well, she said one day she went into the bathroom and she said it 2 times. But she said, you know what, this is ridiculous. And she kind of forgot about it. Well, she said later that night, she went into the bathroom to take a shower. She said as she walked by the mirror, she said it one last time. And she said she got into the shower, and as she turned on the water, the lights went out. She said next thing she knew, the shower curtain fell all the way to the ground, and she ran out of the bathroom screaming. And her mom went in there, she looked, she didn't see anything. Well, she said she told her brother about this, and her brother was like, you're making this up. So about a week later, they're home alone, and they're sitting down in the living room watching a movie, when all of a sudden, they hear the shower turn on upstairs. And they're like, who is in the bathroom? And then they start hearing these cries, like a woman wailing. So they both go upstairs, they go by the bathroom, they slowly open the door, and they said as they went to the curtains and pulled it back, they looked and there was no one there. They ran out of the house until their parents got back. She said a couple weeks later, she was in her bedroom. It's the middle of the night. She hears the shower kick on by itself. So she goes to the bathroom, and she said when she opened the curtain this time, she's seen a woman in a white dress with black hair covering her face laying in the bathtub. So what do you think? Is the legend real? When we think of vampires, we think of New Orleans, but the Appalachian vampire is the original American vampire. Now, what people don't understand is in the 1900s, there were Romanian immigrants who came to the Appalachian Mountains because it reminded them very much of the Carpathian Mountains. And they brought with them this lore of vampirism. Now, this story comes out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. There was a girl named Kira. Now, Kira said that she happened to be downtown one night with her friends, and they were at this nightclub. She said, she was dancing, having a good time, when out of the corner of her eye, she spots this man standing by the bar. And she said he had this beautiful curly brown hair, and he had bright blue eyes, and she said, he was just like almost perfect looking. Well, she said, when she was dancing with her friends and she was talking with him, all she could do was focus on this guy. Eventually, she said something was compelling her to go over and talk to him. So she walks over to this guy and she goes, hi, I'm Kira. How are you? Where are you from? He doesn't say anything. She keeps trying to talk to him, but he's not speaking. So she goes, you don't really talk that much. And this guy then proceeds to grab her hands. And she said when she felt his hands, they were ice cold. And as she looked upon his eyes, she said there was this blank stare. And she said it looked like he was empty inside. And right at that moment, she has this vision of a woman screaming, and this guy is chasing her. Well, all of a sudden, she kind of snaps out of it, and she backs up a little bit and is kind of freaked out now. This guy looks at her and says, what do you think of me? And she says, well, to be honest with you, I think you're a little creepy now. And he goes, I'm sorry. I'm still trying to learn to be human. And she said the next thing she knew, like she felt something telling her to go outside. So she started to walk out the front door. She goes down the road and she goes into this back alley. This guy follows her out. She said this guy came up right next to her, and next thing she knows, she's kissing this guy. And she said it was getting very passionate when all of a sudden he starts getting very aggressive. And she said he was grabbing her arm so hard he could feel the nails going into her skin. And she said, at this point she became terrified and started freaking out when she hears her friends say, Kara, like, are you all right? Is everything okay? Like, what's going on? She turns, she takes off running to her friends. She's all frantic. And she says, this man I met at the bar, like, he was trying to attack me out in the alley. Her friends just kind of look at her like she's crazy. And she's like, what do you, you don't believe me? Like, there seriously was this guy. And they're like, Kira, you were over by the bar alone. And you were talking to someone who there was no one there. And you walked out of the door alone. And you walked into the alley alone. Like, there was no one with you. And she's like, no, what are you talking about? Like, he was there. He's real. And her friends are like, look, you've had too much to drink. We're going to take you back home so you can get some sleep. So she said she went home and she started to think, maybe it was me drinking too much. Like, maybe I just imagined this. Until she goes into the bathroom and she sees these scratch marks on her arm. Now, this next story takes place in Atlanta, Georgia. There was this man named Marcus. Now, Marcus said that he grew up in sort of a bad part of Atlanta. And he said, he was in a lot of trouble and wasn't on the up and up. Well, he said this particular night, him and his group of friends, they're hanging outside of their house. They're listening to music. And he said it was probably about 11 o'clock. So that's when all of a sudden it just got eerily quiet. And he said the next thing he knows, they see this white guy walking down the block. They said just something seemed like really off with him, but also like this looked like a guy that wouldn't be in that neighborhood. So normally they would go up to him and they'd be like, hey, what are you doing in this part of town? And call him out and stuff. But they said they felt like they were in some sort of trance. And this guy makes it all the way to the driveway. He turns and he walks right up to them. And Marcus said he stopped, right next to him. And his eyes were fixated on this one guy who they called Shorty G. And they said this whole time as he stood there, he just was staring straight at Shorty G. Well, this guy walks over to Shorty G. He taps his face and he says, it's a nice night, isn't it? And he turns and he walks away. Well, after this guy leaves, Marcus and his friends are kind of like fighting amongst each other. Like, why didn't you say something? Why did you let him punk you? Like, what's going on? And this whole time, they said Shorty G is just standing there like something was bothering him, like he was terrified or he had seen something. And he said, the rest of the night, Shorty G didn't say anything. And then finally he said, what, I'm going to go home. Like, I'm going to leave. I'll catch you later. So he walks back to his house. And the next day, they're getting ready to all hang out. Shorty G doesn't show up. So they go to his grandma's house. They knock on the door. And the grandma's like, Shorty G never came home last night. I thought he was with you guys. And they're like, no, he said he was going home. For 3 days, they searched for Shorty G. They couldn't find him anywhere. And he said after about a week, they realized he was probably gone. And he said, at this time, they did not call the police. They handled things on their own because they did not want the police in the area. So he said he never heard from Shorty G again. Now, this next story takes place in West Virginia. There was this girl named Caitlin. Caitlin said that her grandmother came over from Romania. And she said she remembered this family story that when her grandmother was younger, her brother was unalived by someone and they never were able to figure out who did it. And she said they buried him in a local cemetery. Fast forward many years later, they said, that they wanted to bring this case back up and they'd found some new evidence. So when they went to bring up the body, they could not find one. And the grandmother said they never found out what happened to him. Well, fast forward now, her brother's daughter at the time, she now has a daughter. And her daughter was like 9 years old. Well, she's at home one night and her daughter goes into the kitchen and she said she sees this man standing next to the kitchen table. And she said he had a brown hat. He had this brown jacket on with some, 70s looking jeans. And she said the guy looked at her and said, don't you recognize me? I'm your grandfather. He turned and then walked out the back door. Well, she runs into her mother's room and she's screaming. And she starts telling her mother, like, hey, someone was in the house. There was this guy and he was in the kitchen. And her mom's like, well, what did he look like? She starts describing him and instantly she starts crying because she goes, that was my dad. That was your grandfather that you've seen. And her grandmother always said that in her country, they believed that sometimes